The gods of One Piece aren't real. Ever since the reveal of Nika, the gods of One Piece have cast a pretty large shadow over the series. Add to that the fact that Poseidon, Pluton, and Uranus are all named after gods of our world and the One Piece world as confirmed by Robin. The fact that the Gorosei are all named after gods of our world and share the same name scheme as the weapon deities. And the fact that Enel falsely claims himself to be a god in an arc that largely represents One Piece as a whole, and there is a lot to talk about involving these so-called gods of the One Piece world. But I'm here to pose an idea that is seemingly supported by a few very important details. Yes, the possibility that the gods of One Piece are just stories. Now, this is not a message about religion. I am not taking a stance related to my views in real life. I am discussing a fictional story. We cool? Sweet, lettuce boys, let's get a move on. There are two crucial points to this theory. Number one is that the Hito Hito no Mi model Nika is classified as a mythical Zoan. And number two is that the Gorosei are likely not actual gods as their names could indicate, but instead could have taken the names of these gods to give themselves credibility as the ruling class. The primary thing that we know about Nika is that he was a character in a story told by slaves about a sun god who would come to their rescue and set them free. There are a few gaps here concerning key information that for argument's sake, we're gonna fill in. We're gonna assume that slavery and this story existed prior to the Void Century, and we're gonna assume that devil fruits first popped up during the Void Century. In chapter 1018, when the sun god Nika was first introduced as a concept, Who's Who poses the question, did he exist or did the slaves dream him up? Well, why not both? If Dr. Vegapunk's theory is correct, devil fruits are born out of a desire or dream for a certain path of evolution, such as I want to be made of fire, or I want to turn into a bird, or I want the embodiment of freedom to liberate me from my chains. Joy Boy may have been the wielder of that fruit, but what if the desire for freedom birthed that fruit as an embodiment of the story, hence the mythical designation? Another thing to note is if Nika did exist, he should have the ancient classification, right? Although maybe that can't apply to an individual, so take that as you will. The Azure Dragon is also a dragon god, by the way, and it also has the mythical description. I just want to put that out there. We know Oda pulls from all over history and literature when designing his story and settings. Any good author does, and this is no exception. So obviously the pharaohs are the most famous case of taking a god's name and using it to rule, but we can go all the way back to ancient Babylon to see kings deify themselves. Although, admittedly, it's never explicitly taking the names of gods. However, I want to look at the Mayans real quick, because the Mayans are super interesting as we know they heavily influenced Shandora. See, Mayan kings would claim to be descended from gods and celestial objects, and were like a liaison to the gods, kind of like the Gorosei are to Im. The Mayans were also highly advanced for their time, and could be the sole inspiration for the ancient kingdom, although that's another story and another video for another time. Okay, brief history lesson over, and I hope you now see that there is precedent for this thing happening all throughout history. It is one of the most common ways for you to solidify yourself as the ruling class to say, hey, buddy, God said so. Sorry, what you gonna do? Fight God? And as a Dark Souls player, my answer would obviously be, yeah, man. Now, another thing that I believe discredits the idea of the gods of One Piece being real is that the Gorosei would certainly know about them. And if they are these actual gods, why are you stressing about a simple devil fruit awakening? Or the ancient weapons, or the revolutionaries, for God's sakes. Briefly, I want to touch on Poseidon in particular, because the other ancient weapons don't really apply here. Poseidon is a living individual, but as far as we know, the power doesn't have a will of its own. It is essentially a super devil fruit, but tied only to one bloodline or position, that of the mermaid princess. But because it's not a Zoan, this is the closest thing we have to the idea of a god existing in One Piece, right? The idea of this mermaid princess who is, for all intents and purposes, just occasionally reincarnated, but not reincarnated in the same way as devil fruits. Oh my god, what if Poseidon was like the basis for whoever created devil fruits? Or did devil fruits just kind of spawn in? I don't know. That's another video for another time. Don't worry, I'm almost done. Let me tie a bow on this real quick. Finally, though, we get the most important piece of the puzzle, and it's something that everybody's talked about at this point. It is an arc that first-timers don't like, myself included, but gets better as you go on and on and on, and that is, obviously, Skypiea and Enel. As you might know at this point, since it's pretty common knowledge, as the series goes on, Skypiea seems more and more like a mini version of the story itself. Whether it's the lost treasure they're seeking, an exiled society cast out from the land of God, just like the Lunarians, by the way, or the giant obstacle that must be scaled in order to confront God, that being the giant Jack in this case. There are countless parallels, and I think this is the part of the story where Oda started to realize that One Piece may go a bit longer than he intended it to. So I like to think of Skypiea as a little time capsule that Oda left for himself in order to remember how he wanted things to go, or at least a rough outline. I don't need to stress too much that a false god ruling the world, because let's face it, the White Sea is basically its own world, with a bunch of elite warrior priests that answer directly to him, isn't even a little bit subtle. Add to that the fact that they've both showcased that they are able to destroy entire islands, and we could still go on and on about the similarities. Oh, maybe Eam has a desire for the moon too? Another mind-blowing connection is that it's a bit suspicious that the world government just happens to be based right on the holy site of a group of indigenous winged people. Sort of like how God's Holy Land was the Verth that flew up from Jaya. You know, a holy site of indigenous winged people. I could go on forever. As I wrote this script, more and more stuff just seemed to click into place. But I want to respect your time, so let's answer the question. Are the gods of One Piece real? Say it with me, guys. Well, after taking everything into account, from the mythical designation to real-world history, I think just like Enel, Eam is a false god, and the gods of One Piece are simply stories. However, at what point does your power grant you the right to be called a proper god, especially if you have something such as the Eternal Youth Surgery? But that remains to be seen though, as does this video here. If you haven't watched it yet, you totally should. As always folks, I've been your host, Listening Walrus. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and say hi in the comments. Bye bye.